Everyone is debating tariffs right now. We have one side versus the other debating whether it is good or bad. But throughout time, we have seen again and again how having only two sides is completely detrimental to progress. So before I get into this, I would just like to say that a few months ago, a friend asked me whether I was Republican or Democrat, and I told him neither. I am American, and I think the two-party system is incredibly flawed and makes sure that we get nothing done. But what we do know is that the United States is in a period of economic turmoil. We have been financially screwed for a long time. So I've dug into forums and spoken with economists to give you an easy breakdown into the world of tariffs and what the plan actually is and what it could mean for you. I'll describe it in layman terms and make it as simply digestible as possible. So first off, what is a tariff? A tariff is, think of it as a tax placed on goods coming into the country. The US government places a percentage on that import and is able to collect that on any import into the country. The main issue with the US right now is that other countries have these tariffs on their goods going into the country. So the US is paying for those tariffs, but the US being the biggest economy in the world, we buy more than we export. But at the same time, we aren't applying those tariffs to our goods, which is creating a trade deficit, causing us to pay more for the goods coming in than we should be recompensated for the goods going out. So this leaves us in a state of economic turmoil, like I just said. So the very basic understanding and easy thing to see with the tariffs is that the US wants to place the tariff on the goods coming in so that it can have that revenue flowing in from imports. Now, the US currently has $36.2 trillion in debt. So everyone right now is asking, well, what will that money for tariffs go to? So a simple answer would be either for running the government so we don't go deeper into debt or paying off the debt. But there's a few underlying things that are also at play. And so a big thing we saw with the tariffs is a stock market crash. Now, if you aren't aware, 10% of the United States wealthiest people own 90% of the stock market, which means that very few middle class and lower class have money in the stock market. But when the tariffs first were in place, because of unknown sentiment and the thought of risk, all of a sudden we saw stocks drop in price. This is because companies are having trouble getting their materials and their goods, and the cost of that company goes down. Share goes down, and investors get out of that stock. They start selling off, and everything tanks. And we saw a massive drop. It was one of the 5th worst days in the stock market history, and it was horrible, at least to the viewer's eye. But as we just discussed, 10% of the United States wealthiest people own 90% of the stocks. So it's not the middle class, it's not the lower class that's losing money. It's the wealthy. They're selling off when they're at a loss in the stock market. And so investing in the stock market is simply buying shares of a company and then waiting to sell it, whether that price goes up or down, based off the economy, based off how well that company is doing. So because the companies are doing worse due to tariffs, all the rich people start to sell off their stocks and the price goes down. It plummets. Now, one thing investors do is they invest in bonds when times are risky and tough. Now, a bond is simply, think of it as you lending your money to the US government. It's considered the safest investment because, well, the US is known to be trusted to pay back their debt. But when people invest in bonds and dump out of the stock market, the wealthy, there's lots of red flags. Everyone's going into the bonds and leaving the stock market, and then there's pressure on the financial system and the economic system to do something. And so what usually happens, at least what's inclined to happen is the Federal Reserve will adjust the interest rates down. Now, when the Federal Reserve adjusts the interest rates and it goes down, that means that all the loans that a normal, typical American could get are much lower interest rate. So you're able to buy a home or get a car on a loan while paying essentially much, much less, which makes it easier on the average American. But we also just stated that the stock market dropped down, down, down drastically. And this is where it creates the perfect buying opportunity. Because the world's wealthiest are dumping all their money. They are taking massive losses of money and putting the market at a place where the average American could actually afford shares of a company and actually invest their money. And this is one thing that's been heavily overlooked, because in this instance, you actually had the president speak out and say, this is a good time to buy. Now, there was some partisan drama there trying to paint it as something horrible. But as a person, an American, you have an opportunity. Prices are lower than they'll be in a long time, which means that you can grow your amount of money. Any amount that you put in, you possibly could grow. Again, this is not financial advice, just saying. This is just explaining the background behind the tariffs and the financial opportunity at play because of them. So you essentially have a transfer of wealth from the richest people to anybody willing to invest in the economy and anybody who is trying to get a loan, because they're going to have lower rates and they're going to be able to grow their money. Now, when these tariffs are placed into effect, there are teams of people at large businesses that sit down and have a meeting, and they discuss the percentages and their sales and their revenue and their imports and their exports, and they say, well, hold on, maybe these percentages don't make sense now. And as what's been promoted, you have businesses and corporations and all these groups of people flooding into the United States to build manufacturing plants and large businesses that supply jobs and economic growth and income. And the more income and value you have flowing throughout the economy, the more that the government is collecting through corporate taxes and businesses and sales. And the more revenue that the government has, the more they are able to cut taxes on individuals. Because the more size and flow through your economy, the less they have to charge you. And so by placing these tariffs, it also causes much more economic growth inside the United States. We're talking parts, supplies for every single business, all these employees that have their own jobs, that they're paying taxes, that are getting taxed when the business pays them. And it's all this flow of money that makes it so that you don't have to pay yourself as much, which is all part of the plan, is causing the growth in the United States so that the people don't have so much taken from them. Because once you start decreasing the amount that you have to pay to the government, the more you have in your own bank account. So that loan that you were going to get now at a lower interest rate, you have more to put down, or you have more to pay it off with. And therefore, you're in a much better financial situation. And that's pretty much the basics of it. The government has long waited to make steps to try and push for some kind of change. And we've all sat aside and just waited and allowed things to get worse and worse. And whether you hate the people in charge or love the people in charge, it's best just to acknowledge that, in my eyes, at least we're doing something. At least we're trying. And guess what? If it doesn't work, then in years down the line, we'll try something else, hopefully. But in my eyes, at least we're trying. And that's all we can do. And understanding that we're just trying to even the playing fields between other countries and ourselves, and even the distance between the economic classes is at least somewhat reassuring. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please like, subscribe, comment. I'll see you guys in the next one.